My boyfriend called me controlling online. He never expected his own dashcam to destroy every lie. My name is Natalie Brooks. I was 28 when a single social media post about trust destroyed the relationship I thought would end in marriage. Ethan Chung and I had been together for 3 years. He was 26, quietly funny, and had a way of making even an ordinary Tuesday feel special. We shared a 2-bedroom apartment, a car loan, a joint savings account, and what I believed was a future together. As it turned out, only the apartment and the debt were real. The changes were subtle at first, so subtle that I kept convincing myself I was imagining them. Whenever his phone buzzed, Ethan would angle the screen away from me. If someone called while we were watching TV, he'd excuse himself and answer in the bedroom instead. Sometimes he'd come back smiling to himself. Other times he looked distracted, as if part of him was still somewhere else. Whenever I asked if something was bothering him, he blamed work, quarter-end pressure, or the Henderson Project is killing everyone. I believed him. Trust had always come more naturally to me than suspicion. I had never gone through his phone or asked for his passwords. I never questioned where he was every hour. If work kept him late, I'd reheat his dinner. If he said he needed some space to clear his head, I gave it to him without making an issue of it. I even caught myself wondering if all the secrecy meant he was planning something for my birthday. Looking back, I realized I was working harder to protect my faith in him than he was working to deserve it. Everything started falling apart on an ordinary Tuesday. I was in the kitchen making pasta when I heard Ethan laugh. It wasn't loud, but it caught my attention because I hadn't heard that laugh in weeks. Lately, every smile seemed reserved for his phone instead of me. "Dinner's almost ready," I called. He didn't even look up. As I walked into the living room, a notification flashed across his screen. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." The sender's name was Marissa. The moment he realized I'd seen it, he swiped the notification away so quickly, he nearly dropped his phone. "Who's Marissa?" His answer didn't come right away, and that brief hesitation told me almost as much as his words. "A coworker." "A coworker sending kissing emojis?" He forced a laugh. "Come on, Natalie. We're working on the Henderson Project together." She was probably joking. I said nothing. The longer I watched him, the more uncomfortable he became. He avoided my eyes, rushed through his explanation, and answered questions I hadn't even asked. I'd gone to enough company events to recognize most of the people Ethan worked with, from his managers to the marketing and accounting teams. I'd never heard anyone mention a Marissa. Is she new? Sort of. What department? Marketing. And her last name? His expression tightened. Why does that matter? Because you've managed to answer everything except what I actually asked. Instead of responding, he unlocked his phone and started scrolling through Instagram. "I've had enough stress today." That was his way of ending the conversation. I let it go, walked back to the kitchen, turned off the stove, and served dinner. We barely spoke while we ate. Then my phone buzzed. Ethan had just posted a picture of 2 coffee cups by a cafe window. "If you can't trust your partner, you don't deserve one. #relationship goals. #trust. #love. I read it twice before looking across the table. Ethan calmly twirled pasta around his fork as though nothing had happened. For a moment, I almost convinced myself I'd misunderstood everything. Maybe Marissa really was just a coworker. Then he looked up. There wasn't a trace of guilt on his face. If anything, he looked pleased with himself. That's when every excuse I'd been making for him disappeared. The post wasn't about trust. It was about controlling the story before anyone else could. I opened the comments and typed, "Facts, 100%. A few seconds later, he smiled. "Thanks, babe." "You're welcome." Then I quietly opened Facebook and changed my relationship status to single. His phone started vibrating almost immediately. Dylan texted first. A few seconds later, his sister called, followed by his mother, while my own phone filled with messages asking whether we'd really broken up. Ethan stared at his screen before looking at me. "What the hell did you just do? I saved us both some time." "What does that even mean?" "It means I'm done." "You're ending 3 years over Facebook?" I met his eyes. "No, I'm ending it because of Marissa." "I already told you she's a coworker." I nodded toward the phone still clutched in his hand. "Then unlock it." He didn't. His fingers only tightened around the phone. That was all the answer I needed. "You don't get to demand my phone. And you don't get to preach about trust while hiding your conversations." He opened his mouth as if another excuse was coming, but nothing did. At that moment, I realized I wasn't walking away because I'd caught him cheating. I was walking away because he'd looked me in the eye and lied without blinking. Less than an hour later, he stuffed a few clothes into a duffel bag and announced he was staying with his sister until I became, in his words, rational. Before leaving, he switched his Instagram account to private. It didn't matter. Screenshots of his post, my comment, and my updated relationship status had already spread through our friend group. Whenever someone asked what had happened, I gave the same answer. "Ask Ethan about Marissa." He came back twice over the following week to collect the rest of his things, always when he thought I'd be at work. The second time, he forgot his tablet on the couch. I picked it up to lock the screen before putting it away, but 2 email subject lines caught my eye. "Can't stop thinking about last night. Room 412 this Friday?" I never opened the emails. I simply photographed the screen, locked the tablet, and put it away. By then, I already knew enough. That night, I logged into our joint account. The bills looked normal until I filtered the recent transactions. Then the pattern appeared. Every Friday for almost 3 months, exactly $500 disappeared from our savings. The withdrawals matched the nights Ethan always claimed he was stuck at the office finishing the Henderson project. When I opened the transaction history, the money led to cash withdrawals, restaurants, boutique hotels, and rideshare charges. Individually, none of it stood out. Together, it explained where our future had gone. I'd spent months working overtime because Ethan insisted we needed to save more before getting engaged. The bank records told a different story. While I was working longer hours for our future, our savings were quietly paying for his affair. The next morning, I met with attorney Melissa Grant. She studied the bank statements and the photo from Ethan's tablet before closing the file. Don't confront him. I wasn't planning to. Good. She slid a notepad toward me. From now on, keep everything. Save your screenshots, emails, bank records, text messages, anything connected to this. And if something happens, write it down while it's still fresh. What if he apologizes? Save it. And if he gets angry, save that too. She folded her hands on the desk. People usually stop being careful once they realize they're losing control. I walked out of her office feeling steadier than I had in weeks. Nothing about my situation had changed, but for the first time, I knew exactly what to do next. That evening, I went through our finances again and noticed several hotel charges less than 10 minutes from Henderson Industries. Ethan could easily leave the office for a few hours, meet Marissa, and still come home claiming he'd been working late. I saved every document in a folder called Evidence. The next afternoon, I searched LinkedIn. Most of Ethan's social media had disappeared, but Marissa's profile was still public. She was listed as the company's marketing director, promoted only 2 months earlier. Then I noticed her full name, Marissa Henderson. She wasn't just another employee, she was a Henderson. A few clicks later, I confirmed what that meant. She was the CEO's daughter. Curious, I searched her name online. The first result was a charity gala. One photo showed Marissa smiling beside a man identified in the caption as Andrew Bennett, her husband. I sat back in my chair. This wasn't just my relationship falling apart anymore. Someone else's marriage was collapsing alongside it. 3 days later, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. Normally, I ignored calls like that. This time I answered. Is this Natalie Brooks? Yes. My name is Andrew Bennett. The moment he introduced himself, everything clicked. He apologized for calling unexpectedly before admitting he'd suspected Marissa for months. I knew something was wrong, he said. I just couldn't prove it. I think I found what you're missing. We met the following afternoon at a quiet coffee shop. Andrew looked exhausted in the way only months of doubt can wear someone down. He talked about canceled dinners, late meetings, and business trips that never quite made sense. I'd heard every one of those excuses before. Then he opened a folder filled with credit card statements, hotel invoices, and phone records. I hired a private investigator, he said. They confirmed Marissa was seeing someone, but they couldn't identify him. I slid the photo of Ethan's tablet across the table. Andrew studied it in silence before quietly reading the subject line. Room 412. You recognize it? He nodded. The Crescent Hotel. You've been there? My wife booked it for our anniversary. Neither of us said another word. We didn't have to. He handed the photo back and let out a weary sigh. My attorney told me not to confront Marissa until everything was documented. My lawyer said the same thing. A faint smile crossed his face. Sounds like they're earning their fees. As we stood to leave, he stopped me. Natalie, I turned. Stop asking yourself what you could have done differently. I managed a small laugh. I've been asking myself that for 3 years. You don't have to anymore. He held my gaze. This wasn't your choice, it was theirs. I thought about those words all the way home. That night, Ethan posted another inspirational quote. Sometimes walking away from toxic people is the healthiest decision you'll ever make. The comments poured in, praising his strength and congratulating him for choosing peace. For a few seconds, I hovered over the keyboard, tempted to post every screenshot, bank record, and hotel receipt I'd collected. Then I remembered Melissa's advice. The evidence would speak when the time was right. I closed the app. Over the next 3 weeks, I stayed quiet, documented everything, and let Ethan keep talking. I hadn't realized how much damage a lie could do when the liar got there first. I found out on a Sunday afternoon while I was grocery shopping. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating. My cousin texted first. Are you okay? A second message followed. Did you really control Ethan like that? Then my college roommate called. Natalie, check Facebook. By the time I reached my car, Ethan's post had already spread through our entire circle. He never mentioned my name, but anyone who knew us knew exactly who he meant. According to Ethan, he'd spent years trapped in an emotionally abusive relationship with a woman who controlled his money, questioned everything he did, and destroyed his confidence. Then I reached the line that almost made me laugh. Sometimes the strongest thing a man can do is walk away from someone who controls him. The comments were predictable. You deserve better. Stay strong. Proud of you. People who had celebrated birthdays with us were suddenly comforting the man who'd been cheating on me. Within an hour, one friend unfriended me, another blocked my number, and someone I hadn't spoken to in years reposted Ethan's story with the caption, "Always believe survivors." That hurt more than anything strangers could have written. The people who actually knew me never bothered to ask what had happened. For a moment, I almost uploaded everything I'd collected. The screenshots, bank records, and hotel receipts. Instead, I called Andrew. You've seen it? I have. What do I do? Nothing. He just lied to hundreds of people. I know. My lawyer warned me this could happen. So did mine. Then trust them. I leaned back against the driver's seat. It feels like he's winning. Andrew was quiet for a second. He's winning the conversation. Then he added, not the case. That was enough. The next morning, I stayed off social media and buried myself in work. It lasted until lunchtime. Someone from Human Resources stopped by my office after receiving an anonymous complaint claiming I had anger management issues. I told her it wasn't true. She thanked me for my time and left, but I already knew the rumors were spreading faster than the facts. That evening, I created a folder called Defamation Timeline and organized every accusation, screenshot, message, and date in chronological order. 3 days later, while sorting through old insurance paperwork, I remembered something Ethan had completely forgotten. Then I remembered the Dashcam. When we bought the car 2 years earlier, he'd insisted on installing a cloud-connected system after someone dented his old car. It'll save us if anything ever happens. Neither of us imagined it would one day preserve the evidence he was trying so hard to hide. I logged into the cloud account and scrolled through months of recordings. Most of them were exactly what you'd expect. Commutes, grocery runs, coffee stops, rainy drives home. I was about to give up when one recording caught my attention. It had been saved just after 2 a.m, about a month before we broke up. The car wasn't moving. It was parked in our assigned space. Then I heard Ethan and Marissa talking. Neither of them realized the interior microphone was recording. I can't keep doing this forever, Ethan said quietly. The guilt is killing me. Just be patient, Marissa replied. I told Andrew I had another board dinner tonight. I told Natalie I had another late project meeting. A few seconds later, Ethan let out a dry laugh. I never thought lying would get this easy. My hand tightened around the mouse. I already told Andrew I want a divorce, Marissa said. Does he believe you? He knows something's wrong. And the lawyers? They've only just started talking. After a brief pause, she lowered her voice. When everything's over, we can finally be together. I thought I'd already heard the worst. Then Marissa asked, what about Natalie? Ethan let out a long sigh. She's a good person. For a heartbeat, I wanted to believe there was still some decency left in him. Then he finished the sentence. She's just boring. Marissa laughed. She's always working. Exactly. I couldn't move. For months, Ethan had encouraged me to work overtime because we supposedly needed more money before getting engaged. Every late night, skipped dinner, and canceled weekend had been another sacrifice for what I thought was our future. Listening to that recording, I finally understood what those sacrifices had really paid for. A second later, I heard Marissa kiss him. You'll be happier with me. I know. I stopped the recording. There was nothing else I needed to hear. I copied the file onto an encrypted drive and sent it to Melissa. Less than 20 minutes later, she replied, do not publish it. Preserve the original file. We'll likely need it during discovery. I answered with a single word. Understood. That evening, Andrew called. My attorney is filing for discovery. So is mine. From that point on, the case was no longer about suspicion. Phone records, financial statements, travel expenses, emails, and company documents could all be requested through the legal process. Their affair was no longer just a secret, it had become evidence. The legal process moved much more quietly than people imagine. There were no dramatic courtroom confrontations or surprise confessions, just attorneys exchanging letters, requesting records, and waiting for deadlines. Within 2 weeks, Andrew filed for divorce while Melissa began untangling the last financial ties between Ethan and me. Ending the relationship had taken one night. Untangling our lives would take months. At first, Ethan and Marissa stuck to the same story. He claimed they hadn't become involved until my relationship with him was already over. She insisted her marriage had ended long before Ethan came into the picture. Neither explanation survived discovery. Every bank statement, hotel invoice, parking record, email timestamp, and expense report chipped away at their story until they finally stopped defending each other. Andrew called after one meeting with his attorney. I think they're turning on each other. What happened? Marissa says Ethan pursued her. I couldn't help smiling. Convenient. It gets better. Now, she claims she tried to end the relationship several times. Almost immediately, Melissa forwarded Ethan's response. According to him, Marissa had invited him to dinner, booked every hotel, promised she was leaving Andrew, and convinced him they had a future together. Neither of them wanted responsibility anymore. Once the lies started falling apart, so did their loyalty. Melissa wasn't surprised. When protecting the lie becomes impossible, people usually start protecting themselves. The paperwork uncovered even more. Several hotel stays had been billed to Henderson Industries. Business travel reimbursements didn't match employee schedules, and expense reports listed client dinners that had never taken place. One receipt claimed Ethan had been entertaining a client. Security records showed him entering the Crescent Hotel with Marissa less than 20 minutes later. That was enough to trigger an internal investigation. Accounting flagged the financial discrepancies, Human Resources opened its own review, and the subpoenas only accelerated both. Andrew called again that Friday. They've opened an investigation. At Henderson Industries? Yeah, so the CEO couldn't bury it. He tried. What changed? The paperwork. Over the following week, employees were interviewed one by one. Some admitted they'd suspected the affair for months. Others recalled Ethan leaving Marissa's office after hours or disappearing with her during company conferences. Accounting questioned repeated hotel reimbursements, and even the receptionist remembered Ethan regularly staying late despite his office sitting dark. None of those details proved anything alone. Together, they matched the documents perfectly. A few days later, both Ethan and Marissa were placed on administrative leave. Neither of them ever returned. By the end of the week, their employee profiles had disappeared from the company directory. Andrew sent me a short text. It's finally happening. That evening, a mutual friend called. I heard Ethan quit. He didn't. There was a brief pause before I added. They fired him. I didn't know. Most people didn't. Ethan had made sure that part of the story never reached social media. Instead, he kept posting inspirational quotes. Sometimes losing everything helps you find yourself. The comments filled with encouragement, praising his strength and resilience. A few months earlier, reading them would have made me furious. This time, they only reminded me how easy it is to admire a story when you've never seen the evidence behind it. The real Ethan wasn't rebuilding his life. He was sitting with lawyers, trying to explain hotel bills, company expenses, and money he'd quietly taken from our future. They weren't supporting the real Ethan. They were supporting the version he'd created online. That version couldn't survive forever. Sooner or later, paperwork catches up with performance. A few days later, Melissa asked me to stop by her office. Several documents were already waiting on the conference table. These came in during discovery, she said. I recognized Ethan's bank records immediately. Beside them were hotel invoices, expense reports, and reimbursement requests. One receipt stopped me cold. It was for an expensive restaurant. The date was our anniversary. I remembered that night perfectly. Ethan had called to say an important client meeting ran late and couldn't be moved. I ate takeout by myself while he kept texting every hour. Still at work. Almost done. Love you. The receipt told a different story. While I was sitting alone in our apartment, he was ordering steak and wine with Marissa and charging it to the company. I stared at the page for several seconds before looking away. Time hadn't made that memory hurt any less. Melissa quietly pushed a box of tissues toward me. I thought I was past this, I admitted. A lot of people think they are, she said gently. I don't understand why this hurts more than everything else. She looked at the receipt. Because you've just learned one of your happiest memories was never real. She was right. It wasn't only the lie that hurt. It was realizing I'd spent months holding on to an anniversary that had never happened the way I remembered it. Before I left, Melissa handed me one last document. This came from Human Resources. The findings were straightforward. Ethan and Marissa had violated company policy by concealing their relationship, misusing company resources, and submitting false expense reports. Both of them were terminated. They received no severance, no recommendation, and no special treatment. Not even being the CEO's daughter was enough to erase a paper trail that had already been documented. As I walked out of Melissa's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. It wasn't happiness or satisfaction, just relief. The truth no longer depended on me convincing anyone. It was sitting in legal files, company records, and official investigations that neither Ethan nor Marissa could explain away. I honestly believed that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Losing his job wasn't the last lie Ethan was willing to tell. The next one was so outrageous that even his own family believed him, at least until I showed them the one piece of evidence he could never argue with. I thought losing his job would finally force Ethan to face what he'd done. Instead, it only gave him another story to tell. Nearly 2 months had passed since I changed my relationship status. The apartment no longer felt like ours. It was quieter now. His coffee mug had disappeared from the cabinet, his shoes were gone from the front door, and I no longer caught myself listening for his keys in the hallway. The silence still stung sometimes, but at least it was honest. Melissa and I were slowly untangling the last pieces of our shared life. The joint savings account had been frozen. The paperwork to sell the car was nearly finished, and the lease was almost entirely in my name. For the first time, I could actually picture a future that didn't include Ethan. Then my phone rang. The caller ID read, Mrs. Chung. I hesitated before answering. Hello? Natalie. Her voice sounded strained, as though she'd been crying. I'm sorry to call you. It's okay. She took a slow breath. I don't know who to believe anymore. I already had a feeling where the conversation was headed. Ethan told us everything, she said quietly. I waited. He says you cheated on him. I didn't interrupt. He says you controlled all the money. Another pause. He says you hacked his accounts. Each accusation was more absurd than the last. Then she added one I hadn't seen coming. He says you ruined his career because you couldn't accept the breakup. I let out a slow breath. Every time Ethan realized one lie wasn't enough, he simply invented a bigger one. I'm guessing that's still not everything, I said. She was silent for several seconds before answering. No. He also says you've been threatening him. I almost laughed. Threatening him? I hadn't spoken to Ethan directly in weeks. Every conversation related to our finances had gone through our lawyers. Mrs. Chung sounded genuinely lost. I don't understand any of this anymore. I know. He keeps saying everyone turned against him because of you. I rested one hand on the kitchen counter and looked around the apartment that used to feel like home. They didn't turn against him because of me, I said quietly. They turned against him because the truth finally caught up with him. Mrs. Chung, can I ask you something? Of course. If everything Ethan has been telling you is true, why hasn't he shown you any proof? The line went quiet. When she finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. I don't know. My eyes drifted to the folder on my dining table. Inside were the Dashcam recording, bank statements, hotel receipts, and every document Melissa had helped me organize over the past several weeks. I'd avoided sending any of it to Ethan's family because I never wanted to drag his parents into this. No mother should have to learn who her son has become through legal evidence. But Ethan wasn't giving me another option. I have something I'd like you to see. What is it? The truth, I replied. That evening, I sent Mrs. Chung the unedited Dashcam recording, the bank records showing Ethan's withdrawals from our joint account, and the hotel receipts that matched those dates. I didn't add a long explanation because the files already made the situation clear. She called about an hour later, and I could hear that she had been crying. How long has this been going on? At least 3 months. The records suggest it may have started earlier. She struggled to steady her voice. I raised him better than this. I didn't know how to answer. There was nothing I could say that would make it easier for her to realize her son had lied to everyone who trusted him. After a moment, she asked about the money Ethan had accused me of stealing. He withdrew it himself, I told her. $500 at a time from our joint account, and the hotel charges matched the same dates. She went quiet as she began putting everything together. I'm sorry, Natalie, I believed him without asking enough questions. I understand. We all want to believe the people we love. Her voice grew quieter before she continued. There's something else. Ethan told us you're pregnant. The claim was so absurd that it took me a second to understand what she had said. I'm not pregnant, Mrs. Chung, and Ethan knows that. We hadn't been intimate for months before the breakup, so even the timeline makes his story impossible. She didn't defend him or ask another question. She simply whispered, "Oh," as if the last part of his story had finally collapsed. When I told Melissa about the call, she said Ethan had probably invented the pregnancy because he believed it would force me to contact him. He wanted an argument he could twist into more proof that I was unstable, but I refused to give him one. The next afternoon, 2 messages arrived from an unknown number. You ruined my life. I hope you're happy. I knew they were from Ethan. Months earlier, I might have replied with a long explanation or demanded that he take responsibility. This time, I took screenshots, forwarded them to Melissa, and deleted the conversation. She replied a few minutes later. Keep the screenshots and don't answer him. A few days later, Andrew called to tell me his divorce was final. I'm sorry, I said. Don't be. It needed to end. He explained that Marissa had denied everything until the financial records, hotel invoices, and messages became impossible to dispute. Once the evidence was entered into the case, there was very little left for her to argue. Neither of us treated it like a victory. Too many people had been hurt, and both relationships had ended because Ethan and Marissa refused to be honest. Still, after months of being accused, doubted, and blamed, neither Andrew nor I had to convince anyone anymore. The records had already shown exactly what happened. There was still one final chapter left before I could close the door on Ethan for good. For the first time since everything began, I realized the last financial ties between Ethan and me were about to disappear. The most valuable thing I was getting back wasn't the money. It was myself. 3 weeks later, we signed the final paperwork. The meeting took place in another bland conference room with plain walls, burnt coffee, and a stack of documents waiting for signatures. Melissa slid the settlement agreement toward me. Once you sign these, every financial tie between you and Ethan is over. I read through the terms one last time. The joint account would stay closed. The car would be sold, and the remaining equity divided after the loan was paid. Ethan had to repay every unauthorized withdrawal. The apartment lease would remain in my name. A few months earlier, those pages would have felt like the end of my future. Now they felt like freedom. I signed every page without hesitation. Melissa gathered the documents and smiled. Congratulations. For what? For getting your life back. I laughed. I never thought I'd hear that from a divorce lawyer. You'd be surprised, she said. A lot of people think they're losing everything. Sometimes they're finally letting go of what's been holding them back. As I left her office, my phone buzzed. Coffee? My treat this time. It was Andrew. I smiled and texted back. See you there. There was never anything romantic between us. We were simply 2 people who had survived the same betrayal. We met at the same cafe where we'd first compared notes. This time we barely mentioned Ethan or Marissa. Instead, we talked about work, books, travel, and how strange normal life felt after months of chaos. After a while, Andrew smiled. You seem different. In a good way? In the best way. How? You look lighter. I smiled into my coffee. I finally stopped waiting for an apology that was never coming. He nodded. That's when healing really starts. Before we left, he handed me a small envelope. I thought you'd want a copy. Inside was the final divorce order ending his marriage. Most of the financial details had been redacted, but one thing was unmistakable. Marissa had lost almost everything she'd tried to protect. The affair hadn't given her a better life. It had destroyed the one she already had. Andrew slipped the papers back into the envelope. I used to think justice looked dramatic. He shook his head. Turns out it's usually just people living with the consequences of their own choices. I think you're right. About a week later, a mutual friend called. Did you hear about Ethan? No. He moved back to his hometown. That didn't surprise me. How's he doing? Living with relatives. And work? Still unemployed. Several companies had contacted Henderson Industries for employment verification. Company policy limited what Henderson Industries could disclose, but a termination tied to documented misconduct was difficult to explain away. Ethan's reputation followed him into every interview, and although I took no pleasure in watching his life unravel, I no longer felt responsible for protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. About a month later, Mrs. Chung called one last time. Her voice was calm. I wanted to thank you. For what? You could have humiliated Ethan in front of everyone, but you didn't. I never wanted to. I know, she said. You showed us the evidence. You didn't try to destroy him. You just stopped covering for him. Her words stayed with me after the call ended. She was right. I hadn't ruined Ethan's life. I had simply refused to keep hiding what he had done. Not long afterward, I opened the small safe in my bedroom closet and found the velvet ring box tucked in the back. Months before everything fell apart, I had bought an engagement ring. I wasn't planning a public proposal. Ethan and I had talked about getting engaged during our anniversary trip, and I had imagined surprising him with the ring before we chose our wedding bands together. The trip never happened, and the ring remained hidden until I finally carried it back to the jewelry store. The manager recognized me. I remember helping you choose this. So do I. I'm sorry things didn't work out. So am I. He inspected the ring and processed the return. When the refund appeared in my account, I expected to feel as though I were giving up the last piece of our future. Instead, I felt relieved. The ring belonged to a life that no longer existed. That evening, I used the money to book 2 weeks in Japan, splitting the trip between Kyoto, Osaka, and Tokyo. I had postponed those places for years because Ethan and I were always saving for some future milestone. There was nothing left to wait for. On my first morning in Kyoto, I woke before sunrise and walked through streets that were still almost empty. For once, I wasn't replaying arguments, checking someone's location, or tensing whenever a phone buzzed. I was simply present. I continued therapy after I returned home, not because I was still falling apart, but because I didn't want Ethan's betrayal following me into whatever came next. Looking back, discovering Marissa wasn't the moment that changed my life. Neither was the Dashcam recording, the legal case, or Ethan losing his job. Everything shifted the night he posted. If you can't trust your partner, you don't deserve one. At the time, I saw only the hypocrisy. Later, I understood something simpler. He had expected loyalty from me while giving none in return. Changing my relationship status didn't ruin my life. It finally made me stop fighting for a relationship that Ethan had already walked away from long before I knew it. The lawyers sorted out the money and the paperwork. Time took care of everything else. Looking back, I didn't come away with a perfect life lesson. I simply learned to trust the feeling I kept trying to explain away. I learned that protecting someone else's image should never come at the cost of my own peace, and that not every accusation deserves a response. Some people choose the story they want to believe, no matter what the evidence says. After those last text messages, I never heard from Ethan again. His family occasionally sent holiday greetings or brief apologies, and I always wished them well before getting on with my life. About a year later, I sold the apartment and moved somewhere that held no memories of him. I settled into new routines, met new people, and stopped postponing the things I'd always wanted to do simply because I was waiting for the right time. One afternoon, while unpacking boxes in my new place, I found an old screenshot buried in a forgotten folder. It was Ethan's post. If you can't trust your partner, you don't deserve one. Underneath it was my reply. Facts. 100%. I smiled for a second before deleting the screenshot and emptying the recycle bin. Not because I wanted to erase what happened. I deleted it because I no longer needed proof to remind myself that I had been telling the truth all along.